Ukraine is on the verge of a turning point. Powerful aerial bombs created for the Ukrainian armed forces. Brutal battle, cunning trap by the Ukrainian armed forces. Shock from Pokrovsk. Kim soldiers are already here. The DPRK elite are at the borders. Sensational! The West has awakened. NATO has made a revolutionary decision. This will turn the tide of the war. And the Ukrainian armed forces have received a unique killer robot. All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. Urgent! Ukraine is on the home stretch. A turning point on the front, Ukraine has created its own guided aerial bombs. This is a new level of warfare. Details on when these deadly bombs will become widely available to our aces and what their destructive capabilities are coming up next. While Russian guided aerial bombs keep falling on Ukrainian cities, wiping them off the map, Ukraine is preparing its response. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, Ukrainian engineers have created their own version of a glide bomb. A bomb capable of flying dozens of kilometers and striking its target with precision. The Ukrainian counterpart to the Russian UMPK is already flying and hitting targets at a distance of 60 kilometers. This is a new development by the Meduet Design Bureau. They took a standard high-explosive aerial bomb and turned it into a guided one, with wings, navigation, and a precise guidance module. And all of this is made in Ukraine. The planning and control module for the 500-kilogram bomb is their own design. The specially designed wings are easily attached to the bomb. There are no issues with attaching it. It only takes a few minutes. Domestic enterprises have been involved in the manufacturing process. The navigation module is our own. However, there is now a decision to test a new development from one of the leading French companies on our product. But there are still some components that we are forced to import from abroad. Testing is already underway. The bombs are dropped from frontline Su-24S in level flight. Their task is to reach targets tens of kilometers away and hit them precisely. Currently, the range is 60 kilometers, with the goal to reach 80, and in the future, up to a full 100 kilometers when dropped from an altitude of 10 kilometers. But there are certain problems, and they are not technical at all, but financial. We are looking for any opportunity, because the cost of one such unit is practically about 1,200,000 hryvnias, or around $25,000. In fact, at the moment, funding is almost the main limiting factor for completing work on this project in its current version before the start of serial production of the domestic Ukrainian KAB.
This thing is more suitable for destroying something defensive, like fortifications, something stationary, such as, trenches or large capital structures, or a single large building. So for the advancing side, using this weapon is really great. So they see our structures, our trenches, launch 2 or 3 dozen bombs, destroy these structures, and gain an advantage. Russia advances in small groups, in small parties, and it's harder to attack them. So we can only attack something stationary, like headquarters or places where the Russian command is located. But again, at what distance from the front line? So first you have to find it, then strike. So to say that it will radically change the situation, well, you can't, but, well, it will definitely cause extra losses for the Russian army. But again, it has to be on a massive scale, massive. I don't know, this weapon needs to be produced by the hundreds every day.
Meanwhile, there is hysteria in Russia. After the first footage of the Ukrainian guided aerial bomb appeared, pro-Kremlin channels started to openly panic. The Ukrainians have started using their own guided aerial bombs. The first footage of such munitions being dropped has been published. For those who didn't get it or bad, it is that our technology with FABs. This will seriously complicate the situation at the front. Just as we once complicated it ourselves, the war requires hundreds of such bombs every day. Western models like the JDAM-ER, AASM Hammer, and GBU-39B do not cover the entire need. That is precisely why launching serial production of our own guided aerial bomb is vital. Moreover, even at the testing stage, the Ukrainian bomb is already cheaper than its Western counterparts, which means it is faster and more accessible. Shock! A multi-thousand-strong Russian army is pushing toward Dnipropetrovsk region. The enemy is going all in. A brutal battle. Their troops will be reinforced by Kim's soldiers. Umerov has made an urgent statement. An anti-Shahed solution has been found. You need to hear this. Russia is on the verge of collapse. The Kremlin is depleting its stockpiles of Soviet armored vehicles almost to the breaking point. Watch further for all the shocking events from the front. The occupiers are moving equipment in the temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories towards Zaporizhia. In the direction of Rostov-on-Don, Azovsk, Mariupol, Pology, and Berdyansk, about 7 platforms with armored vehicles, including tanks, have been recorded. More than 40 trucks carrying personnel and ammunition have also been noted.
First of all, the front is dynamic everywhere in its own way. Some say that there is a positional war. In any case, if we're talking about aviation activity, it's happening everywhere, including on Zaporizhia front. We distinguish between the Orikhiv direction and accordingly the Holyipol direction. The enemy is trying to probe our defenses and is also constantly using firepower to put pressure on our defenses. I think that most likely this is probably a diversion. On the other hand, we're talking about the fact that in this location, the Novopavlivka direction is actually nearby. It's very active, very dynamic. And the enemy is trying to move precisely toward the junction of 3 regions, Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhia. That's why it's loud and you can hear it.
But if we talk about the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians have their own interests here regarding Donbas.
It's clear this is a Russian offensive element toward Pokrovsk. From this flank, here the enemy is trying to establish a foothold to advance further toward Pokrovsk.
At the same time, along the route from Crimea through temporarily occupied Mariupol and Russian Rostov, the occupiers are transferring equipment to Sumy.
Regarding Sumy, or the North Slobozhensky direction as it is now called, it can be noted that the enemy's blitzkrieg has failed. That's what is obvious. The fact that the enemy is still trying to push and will try to launch intensive attacks in this direction in the near future is also obvious. On the other hand, we can say that as of today, our forces have managed to stabilize the line of combat engagement to a certain extent. At the very least, the signs of stabilization are obvious today. There is still a lot of combat work ahead for the units operating in this direction, but it is clear that there is no threat of a large-scale offensive infantry assault or mechanized attack on the regional center of Sumy.
The information about the Russian army being reinforced by North Korean soldiers certainly does not speak of its successes.
It is obvious that Russia needs this kind of help, because we know very well that the troops Kim Jong-un sent to Russia, to the Kursk region, although they were not trained, let's say, in the basics of modern warfare, we are primarily talking about the use of drones. We remember those attacks, don't we? As for everything else regarding their training, especially individual training, it is actually at a rather high level, considering that the best are being sent. You could say that in this way, Kim Jong-un might even be putting his own personal safety at risk.
According to South Korea's National Intelligence Service, as reported by Reuters, North Korea may send an unspecified number of troops to Russia to fight against Ukraine in July or August of 2025. North Korea will also continue to supply weapons to Russia. The shortage of personnel among the Russians is primarily caused by the Kremlin dictator's indifference toward his own citizens. In addition to sending Russians to be slaughtered, Putin also has the occupiers participate in various operations that later backfire on them. Russian servicemen who took part in Operation Potok, also known as Truba, face serious health consequences. According to propagandist Anastasia Kashevarova, some of them were diagnosed with lung cancer and pulmonary artery thromboembolism, which hospitals in Kursk attributed to bronchitis. Those who were lucky enough to survive received a compensation of 100,000 rubles from Russia. Some soldiers were less fortunate and died right inside the pipe. The Russians are facing shortages both in manpower and equipment, and they are trying to make up for this shortage by repairing the remaining Soviet-era equipment that survived on the front lines or in warehouses.
Today, Russia has already used up almost everything it could from its Soviet stockpiles.
Old Russian equipment is being destroyed by new technologies from Ukraine and its partners. Turkish Bayraktar drones have been spotted operating on the southern section of the front. The Russians allegedly shot down 39 Ukrainian drones over their own territory on the night of the 27th of June. Overnight, Rosaviatsia imposed restrictions on the operation of airports in Volgograd, Samara and Saratov. Urgent! The Ukrainian armed forces have received a unique killer robot, a deadly weapon of domestic design. There is no escape from them. Meanwhile, the occupiers are preparing hell near Kupiansk. The defense forces are repelling fierce assaults, and on the banks of the Oskil, battles continue that chill the blood. We will show the truth about what is happening at the front. Details, figures, and footage right now.
The Ukrainian army has received a new combat assistant. The unmanned ground complex Protector has been officially introduced into the military. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has completed the modification and granted permission for the operation of the new heavy unmanned ground complex Protector, developed by a domestic manufacturer. This autonomous combat vehicle was created specifically for the conditions of modern warfare, taking into account the real experience gained by Ukrainian soldiers at the front. The Protector is designed to carry out missions in the most challenging conditions, from mined forest belts to swampy or snow-covered sections of the front. Thanks to its all-wheel drive, powerful internal combustion engine, and high off-road capability, it can overcome ditches, cobblestone roads, rough terrain, and even fords. Run-flat tires allow the vehicle to keep moving even when damaged, which is critically important in combat conditions. The platform can carry up to 700 kilograms of cargo. This includes ammunition, equipment, water, medical supplies, or even the evacuation of the wounded. Thanks to a range of up to 400 kilometers without recharging or refueling, the Protector can operate effectively at a considerable distance from its base, providing rapid logistics support in combat conditions. In addition to transportation, the drone can be easily modified for other tasks. Its design easily allows for the integration of robotic combat modules, electronic warfare systems, electronic intelligence systems, as well as communication or surveillance equipment. Such versatility opens up new possibilities for use on the front lines, especially in unstable situations or when there is a high threat to personnel. The Ministry of Defense emphasizes, this is not just another technical innovation, but a new stage in the development of combat robotic systems. We are talking about a full-sized unmanned vehicle created specifically for the front line. It makes it possible to carry out dangerous missions without risking the lives of Ukrainian soldiers, bringing the idea of autonomous combat closer to reality. In the context of a full-scale war, where the front is constantly shifting and logistics are often complicated by shelling and enemy attacks, such robotic systems could become a real breakthrough. They not only relieve people of burdensome tasks, but also pave the way for a new paradigm of warfare, where dangerous work is replaced by technology. The ministry also addresses domestic manufacturers of weapons and military equipment with a reminder: all the necessary information about the procedure for modifying new models can be found on the official website of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. This is an important step to ensure that innovative developments are deployed more quickly and begin working towards victory. Meanwhile, operators of the Unmanned Aviation Unit Phoenix continue to impress with their accuracy and effectiveness. This time in the Kharkiv direction, they inflicted serious losses on Russian troops by destroying several pieces of heavy equipment at once. It is specified that during the combat operation, an armored personnel carrier, a battle tank, a mortar crew, and a self-propelled artillery unit Gvozdika, as well as several enemy trucks, were destroyed. The unit reported that the attacks were carried out from the air using strike drones, which quickly identified targets and hit them with minimal response time. Such effectiveness is the result of constant improvement of tactics and the coordinated work of the crews. According to experts, the systematic operations of Phoenix has significantly weakened the enemy's logistics and combat capabilities in the region. The destruction of armored vehicles and artillery demonstrates the growing role of strike UAVs in modern warfare, especially in dynamic and critical sectors of the front. Meanwhile, the occupiers are being drawn toward Kupiansk. Despite the lack of crossings, attempts to encircle continue. In the north of the Kharkiv region, the situation remains extremely tense. Active fighting continues in the area of Pokrovsk and the surrounding villages. Russian forces are trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses, but without success. Things are especially heated on the banks of the Oskil River, not far from Kupiansk, where the enemy does not stop trying to create conditions for the further encirclement of the city. The defense forces note that the main enemy efforts are concentrated in the directions of Dvorishna, Kamenka, Krasne Pershe, and Fikholivka. Assault actions have also been recorded near Kondrashivka, already on the western bank of the Oskil. This indicates that the occupiers are trying at any cost to gain a foothold on the other side of the river. However, the Russians are critically lacking logistics to carry out their plans. They still do not have any crossings over the Oskil. The latest attempts to set up pontoon or temporary structures have ended in failure. Despite this, their intentions have not changed. The enemy continues to look for ways to transfer equipment to the western bank. Although there are no full-fledged crossings, the enemy is actively using makeshift methods. They transport motor vehicles, ATVs, and equipment on boats or homemade rafts, which are pulled across the river with ropes. This allows them to maintain a foothold near Kupiansk, especially on the narrow and shallow sections of the river. Ukrainian forces are holding the defense and delivering fire strikes against enemy attempts to cross the river. But headquarters emphasize, Russia has not abandoned the idea of taking Kupiansk. Despite all the difficulties, the occupiers continue to prepare new assaults. That's all for today. Tune in tomorrow for more news.
The advance of Russian occupiers in the Sumy region has been halted and the front line has been stabilized. This was reported by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Syrsky. According to him, Russian troops have been stopped at the border, and in certain areas, Ukrainian units are switching to active defense. A special group has been created to strengthen the defense of the Sumy region, new shelters are being built, anti-drone corridors are being established, and logistics are being improved. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine have tied down about 50,000 Russian troops, including elite airborne and marine brigades.
Our offensive actions in the Glushkovsky district of the Kursk region forced the enemy to send part of their troops to defend their own territory. This has significantly reduced the offensive capabilities of the main enemy force grouping in the Sumy direction. Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, the Russian army tried to attack near Khrekivka, Ritkodub, Olivka and Torske. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russian occupiers attempted to push back the Ukrainian armed forces in the areas of Poltavka, Malinivka, Myrolubivka, Novosergivka and Udachne. And in the Novopavlivka direction, the enemy carried out assault operations near Bohatyr, Fedorivka and Otradne.
The enemy is also increasing pressure on the Novopavlivka sector of the front, because this is part of the Pokrovsk offensive accordingly. This is an attempt to advance, and unfortunately the enemy is managing to make some progress at the junction of the Donetsk and the Dnipropetrovsk regions. Well, in fact, the efforts they are making are not leading to any major changes, for example, on the battlefield, but nevertheless the pressure continues.
In the Pokrovsk direction, drone operators from the Ukrainian Unmanned Systems Forces destroyed a Russian army cannon, as well as an enemy cargo truck along with its ammunition. A hit by a Ukrainian FPV drone in the truck bed caused a fire, which after a while led to the entire ammunition load exploding. Meanwhile, drone operators from the Signum battalion used an FPV drone to destroy a Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher system in one of the directions. The target was spotted by aerial reconnaissance from the 60th Mechanized Brigade while the launcher was firing at Ukrainian armed forces positions. The Grad didn't even have time to leave its firing position. It was destroyed along with the remaining ammunition.
These are drones. The activity is insane on both sides. Troop movements are, well, basically impossible for carrying out any operations. Nevertheless, the Russians are trying.
Meanwhile, North Korea may send additional troops to Russia. In addition, Pyongyang continues to supply weapons to the Kremlin. Reuters reports this, citing South Korean intelligence. They believe that Russia is preparing for a full-scale offensive in Ukraine. South Korean intelligence also notes that in exchange for supplying artillery shells and rockets to Russia, Pyongyang is likely receiving technical consultations on satellite launches and missile guidance systems.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now. A revolution on the front lines is simply incredible. For the first time in the history of the war, Ukrainians have used reusable carrier drones equipped with artificial intelligence against Russia. They deliver explosives over hundreds of kilometers. What does this mean for the front lines? The whole truth about this cutting-edge technology coming up next.
A revolution in the management and control of drones. Ukrainian defenders are presenting their unique fire control system. No other country in the world has anything like this in its arsenal. Drone pilots are no longer needed. They have been replaced by artificial intelligence. The Ukrainian startup Strategy Force Solution has, for the first time, used its advanced Gogol M mother drones for autonomous combat missions against Russian targets deep behind enemy lines.
A mission costing $10,000 replaces what previously required missile systems worth $3 to $5 million.
It's worth noting that this is far from the only case of so-called mother drones being used at the front. One of the first in this field was the Ukrainian Dovbush T-10. Under its wing, this massive UAV carries several smaller FPV drones. After delivering them to the location, the Dovbush drops them from a high altitude and then, with the help of an operator, they are guided toward a potential target. In this way, the UAV becomes a multi-purpose frontline drone for supporting both offensive and defensive actions of the Ukrainian armed forces, experts explain.
This allows us to address a number of issues, for example, destroying electronic warfare systems or radar equipment, that is, air defense systems. because in this case, the small charge that an FPV drone can carry is enough to disable a large machine that operates and can monitor the airspace for up to 100 kilometers around itself.
But while the Ukrainian Dovbush drone is still piloted by a human, the domestic Gogol M is unique in that it is fully autonomous. Here everything is controlled by AI, which uses a combination of advanced sensors and lidars. This world model allows the artificial intelligence to make decisions based on the flight trajectory and to carry out missions just as well as a human pilot.
In a certain sense, it's similar to a self-driving car. For the autopilot to work properly, it needs a lot of cameras. There aren't as many obstacles in the air, so we make the system lightweight. That's exactly how we developed our camera system. LiDAR and communications, which allow the artificial intelligence to navigate, coordinate actions, and maneuver around obstacles. This enables autonomous flight, navigation, and interaction without GPS and constant operator control.
According to the developers, this approach allows the mothership drone to strike targets at distances of up to 300 kilometers.
We're talking not only about the Russian army's operational rear areas, but also accordingly its strategic ones. This means the ability to strike both permanent and temporary personnel deployment points, command and control centers, but most importantly both field ammunition depots and accordingly stationary ones. Additionally, it includes concentrations of heavy armored vehicles, and note, this is already within the rear infrastructure of the Russian occupation army, and not only in the occupied territories of Ukraine, but primarily in the territory of occupied Crimea. This accordingly reduces the ability to provide logistics, to transfer personnel, armored vehicles, and fuel and lubricants to the Kherson and Zaporizhia directions, and most importantly to the territory of the Russian Federation. This is a very significant challenge that makes it impossible for the Russian side.
Let's take a closer look at the striking capabilities of the Gogol M. Under the wing of this AI-controlled mothership drone are two more compact FPVs. Each of them has its own lightweight version of a smart autopilot.
This is a very serious nuance that essentially nullifies the capabilities of Russian electronic warfare systems to counter Ukrainian drones in real time. Here, as they say, we are already ahead of the Russian Federation in terms of technological solutions and the advancement of strike capabilities.
But the uniqueness of this Ukrainian development doesn't end there. According to the developers of Gogol M, its FPV drones can not only autonomously home in on a target, but can quite literally hunt it down. If necessary, these strike UAVs are even capable of landing and waiting for a target to appear or, for example, for it to leave its fortified shelters. Such drones can be left along the path of a convoy, ready for an autonomous attack when enemy vehicles appear on the horizon or hidden nearby enemy airfields.
It supports missions involving ambushes, landing, and waiting for targets, as well as autonomous real-time search.
The developers promise to soon reach a production volume of 50 Gogol M mothership drones per month and 400 strike FPVs for them. The engineers also plan to scale up the project so that the mothership drone can carry a larger payload.
In the future, we will see such drones that will be able to carry 6, 12, or maybe even more drones, which will then, for example, conduct reconnaissance and then carry out combat missions. So thanks to the fact that the large drone, for example, conducts reconnaissance, then designates a target, and these FPV drones it carries under its wing
can directly eliminate Putin.
A turning point is coming. While China and North Korea are actively supplying Russia with soldiers, drones, ammunition, and equipment, the West has finally woken up. A revolutionary NATO decision, a new rule for the alliance. Part of the defense budget goes to defense and part to Ukraine. All the details of this historic step are coming up next.
Without exaggeration, this is a historic decision and an unequivocal signal to the Kremlin. On the 25th of June, the member countries of the North Atlantic Alliance in The Hague approved an increase in defense spending. This is stated in the summit declaration adopted by the heads of state and government of the NATO member countries.
United in the face of serious threats and security challenges, particularly the long-term threat posed by Russia to Euro-Atlantic security and the ongoing threat of terrorism, the Allies commit to annually investing 5% of GDP in core defense needs, as well as defense and security-related expenditures by 2035 to ensure our individual and collective obligations in accordance with Article 3 of the Washington Treaty.
The alliance members have acknowledged this and included it in the declaration. Russia is a long-term, serious threat to the security of all NATO members. The declaration is a direct signal to Putin. The alliance members are already beginning to prepare for war with Russia.
Leaders, analysts, and experts agree that Putin may be ready after 2030 to carry out an annexation against NATO countries, and 2030 is starting to appear in many documents.
US President Donald Trump insisted on increasing defense spending. He repeatedly hinted that Washington might leave the alliance if European countries do not spend more. Now, however, European countries will be spending more on defense, and the US remains in the alliance. NATO members will spend part of the money on core defense needs and part on broader measures, such as building fortifications and protecting infrastructure.
Allies will consistently allocate at least 3.5% of their respective GDP annually based on the agreed-upon NATO definition of defense spending by the year 2035 for essential resource and core defense needs, as well as to fully achieve all specified NATO targets and objectives. Allies agree to provide annual plans showing a credible, gradual path to achieving this goal, and allies will allocate up to 1.5% of GDP each year specifically for the protection of our critical infrastructure, securing our networks, ensuring our civil preparedness and resilience, fostering innovation, and strengthening our defense industrial base.
The declaration emphasizes the unwavering commitment to collective defense enshrined in Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. An attack on one of us is an attack on all, the document states. For Ukraine, the increase in defense spending is a positive signal. The money and weapons that countries allocate to Ukraine will be included in this 5%. And the more alliance members spend on defense and the development of the military-industrial complex, the more Ukraine will benefit from it.
Aid to Ukraine has been approved as a contribution to Euro-Atlantic security. In other words, we are part of this important space that the Kremlin seeks to destroy. It is impossible to protect NATO without investing in and helping Ukraine, investing now in the supply of weapons, and investing in the longer term in the defense industry in order to produce weapons with Ukraine and for Ukraine and to supply them to us. Otherwise, it is simply impossible to guarantee European security.
The final declaration leaves no questions unanswered. It mentions only two countries, Russia as a long-term threat and Ukraine, whose defense has been recognized as a priority task for the alliance.
The world is on the brink of catastrophe. The forces of evil are uniting, becoming a deadly threat to the entire democratic world. And while the United States is thrown into confusion by Trump's actions, Europe seems to be starting to wake up. The European Union has allocated 1 billion euros for the purchase of Ukrainian weapons, and this will change a lot. Watch this.
Europe will allocate 1 billion euros for the production of Ukrainian weapons for Ukraine. This was announced yesterday by the head of EU diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, while on a visit to Lviv.
We have just allocated 1 billion euros for the Ukrainian defense industry so that Ukraine can better defend itself. This funding will directly support Ukrainian defense companies and provide additional assistance over the coming months, which are critically important.
Analysts note that this decision in Europe was not made out of prosperity, since sending actual weapons would be much more effective today than investments. However, more than 3 years of full-scale war in Ukraine have significantly depleted European weapon stockpiles.
They have money, but the scale of military production in Europe is very small for today's needs. It's smaller than in Russia, and that's absolutely right. And it's definitely in order of magnitude smaller than in the United States.
At the same time, although investments in the Ukrainian defense industry won't bring immediate results, in a war of attrition, which is what Putin is counting on, they give us several advantages at once. First of all, analysts say there really is room to invest here. After all, to this day, there are still idle factories in Ukraine due to a lack of funding.
Ukraine has a very large reserve for increasing military production, because since Soviet times there have been a lot of enterprises, well-trained personnel. Despite Russian strikes, most of these enterprises, at least the main ones, still have underground facilities, and all of this can be activated.
Secondly, even what has already been activated has shown phenomenal results. Today, more than a third of the weapons used by the Ukrainian armed forces at the front are domestically produced. According to the Ministry of Strategic Industries, around 800 enterprises in the defense sector produced $9 billion worth of weapons in 2024. And since the beginning of this year, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has already adopted more than 120 new types of weapons and equipment for the armed forces, of which more than 85% are of Ukrainian production.
According to official statistical reports, over the past 3 years, the volume of weapons and ammunition produced has increased almost 20-fold. The same growth rates are observed in the production of military vehicles and aircraft. Even the domestically produced Bogdana self-propelled artillery systems were no longer making them one by one, but at least 20 units per month.
Investing in Ukrainian weapons gives us yet another unexpected advantage. This way, with European money, it will be possible to get twice as many weapons due to the lower production costs.
These funds can be invested in purchasing weapons in Ukraine. At the same time, their cost will be half that of production in the EU or the US.
Moreover, money for the Ukrainian defense industry means not only weapons but also the economy. Giving our manufacturers the opportunity to gain experience and work today will bring in billions of dollars tomorrow.
The development of the domestic defense industry is a very good thing, as it is a sector with high added value and one where Ukraine possesses unique expertise. Now the main thing is to make proper use of this expertise and to develop serial models of weapons. It is worth noting that if the program to rearm Europe is implemented and peace is established in Ukraine, we could become one of the key arms suppliers to the EU and earn money from it.
Let me remind you that earlier the European Commissioner for Enlargement, Marta Koch, assured that the European Union would provide Ukraine with another 9 billion euros by the end of 2025.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, stay tuned for the next episode.